Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Graphic Thoughts Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Panel, and I got my co hosts with me today, Thor and Mickey, my sister's dogs, given they're sitting in over here listening to me record this. And today's episode is another comic book episode. I'm very excited for this episode, given it is an X-Men episode, and X-Men is my favorite Marvel team and favorite Marvel characters of all time. So today's episode will be on the Days of Future Past storyline, one of my favorites and one of the most popular storylines of all time. And then on a relatively smaller storyline in the Hellfire Vigil, which is a newer storyline. I'm trying to figure out where or when this came out. We'll figure that out later. It's in my notes here somewhere. But I'm very excited to get right into these books. X-Men has always been my favorite. I don't know why. I think it's always mainly the different mutants aren't like superheroes, like they choose to be superheroes or anything like that. I mean, they choose to be in the good or bad side, but they don't choose to have their powers, or it's not an experiment or anything that gives them their powers. They're born with this. It's a mutation. That's genetic. I've always liked that aspect of it. I like that they relatively don't have a choice in it. I think it really changes the idea of a superhero story when you give that aspect of it. And I've always thought I like the original classic X-Men with just Jean, Cyclops, Angel, Beast, and Iceman the most, but I've basically liked all the incarnations of X-Men over the years. In the spin-offs, I've read most of X-Force. I've read all the Avengers versus X-Men series, which we will do for an episode at some point also. But why we're doing this one now, for one, I've been wanting to do an X-Men episode for a couple weeks now. And then for two, I recently picked up the Hellfire Vigil, which is the shorter comic that we're going to do at the end here. I recently picked that up, and I was excited to read it, so I read through it, and I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to do that for the episode. And it's kind of a contrast because Days of Future Past was in the 80s or 90s. I want to say 90s. And this one was in the late 2000s. I'm not sure when it came out yet. I got to look through my notes, but I know I wrote it down somewhere. But when we actually jump into the breakdown, we'll get into all of that. I'm very excited for all of this. As a very, very big X-Men fan, and hopefully you guys are X-Men fans. Hopefully you guys will get a hell of a kick out of this as much as I'm going to be enjoying doing it. So let's get right down into it. Alrighty, so before we get into it, I did want to say that in the intro I said that I was going to do the Hellfire Vigil. So a little behind the scenes. I actually sometimes record the intro before I record the rest of the episode. So I'm not actually going to do the Hellfire Vigil. I changed my mind about that. I want to do the Hellfire Vigil with the Hellfire Gala. They're doing the same, and just a big episode would be better. I have just a different episode or a different comic to do at the end of this one after the main breakdown of the episode, which will be Days of Future Past as a little surprise. It's just a one issue, or I think we'll do 2 issues of it, but it's a 1 issue comic mainly. Well, not a 1 issue comic, but I just want to kind of introduce the story of it without actually jumping into the entirety of the story. But I am pretty excited for that. I do want to get into, before we actually get into breaking down Days of Future Past, I do want to get into just background, if it makes sense. What the reasons behind writing the story of stuff of that nature. The Days of Future Past came out in 1981. It was in the Uncanny X-Men. It was issues 141 to 142. Came out in January 1981 and February 1981. It came out, it's monthly issues at the time, and I relatively think they still do monthly issues normally. If I'm not mistaken, they do monthly issues. The issues were by Chris Claremont and illustrated by John Byrne. John Byrne has done just about everything. He's done X-Men, he's done Avengers, he's done Fantastic Four, he basically reimagined Superman. He's done just about everything, and then Chris Claremont has done just about everything in X-Men. So 2 really good people to do it, be on the writing and illustrating for this book. At the time, it's important to remember that at the time in the 1980s, X-Men was extremely, extremely popular. The original incarnation of X-Men in 1960 with, I think it was she was Marvel Girl at the time, but Jean Grey, Cyclops, Iceman, Beast, and Angel. That's the original incarnation of the X-Men, and obviously Professor X. That's my favorite, but a lot of people weren't very much into that. It wasn't very popular. It didn't get super popular until Uncanny X-Men when they took some people out, and then they added Nightcrawler, Storm, Storm, Colossus, Wolverine. They got super, super popular, and the series really took off. But it was extremely, extremely popular, and the Days of Future Past story quickly became one of the most iconic stories that have ever been written in Marvel, DC, and then specifically for the X-Men in general. Because it just introduced so much to the franchise. For one, different timelines and stuff of that nature, and then I'm not going to really get into too much else that it introduced yet, just because I want to break down the story, and then for those who didn't read it, I want to get them into the story before I actually, spoil anything about it too much. But it led to a lot of, like a later adaptation, it led to a movie, and then a lot of, not spin-offs, but stuff that led from it. And then, actually, there were a couple spin-off situations from it, too, so there was a lot of similar situation-like things from that. All from the original story in 1981. It was basically written because they wanted to tell a powerful warning story about prejudice, government control, and the fear of minorities. This is kind of what X-Men's always been about. This isn't a new thing. That's why it's always so silly when people are like, oh, Marvel's gone woke. Marvel's gone woke. They've always been woke. This is literally their thing. This is why they're so popular. Not the only reason, but still. These themes have always been central to the X-Men canon. Yeah, we're not going to be doing... Just wanted to make it sure we know that we're not going to be doing the Hellfire Vigil. We are going to be doing a different story at the end rather than that, so wait for that. And let's get right into the breakdown of Days of Future Past. Alrighty, so let's get right into the story here. Obviously, we're hopping into Days of Future Past. It introduces the idea of a nightmare future ruled by Sentinels, where mutants and many heroes are dead. The X-Men attempt to change history to stop the future from happening. That's basically the gist of the story. So let's hop right into it. The future timeline, this dark dystopia that we see, the story opens in 2013 in the comics future timeline. 2013 obviously is years and years ago now, but the story came out in the 80s, so it was pretty far in the future then. The world has become a mutant concentration camp dystopia controlled by giant mutant hunting robots called Sentinels. Sentinels obviously have been a fixture in the comics for a good amount of time now, and even appeared in the original couple seasons of X-Men, 97. They appeared in those, so they've been in the X-Men comics and the X-Men continuity for a while, and then they did eventually appear in Days of Future Past, the movie, which wasn't very good, but it did. There was some elements of it that I really liked, including the look of the futuristic Sentinels. I thought that was realistically what they probably would look like upgraded from the 1980s look of the purple and pinks. But not much else in the movie was really that good. Colossus was cool. I thought, you know what, we'll get into the movie at the end of this, but what happened to the world that kind of led to all of this happening? The U.S. government authorizes Sentinels to hunt mutants. The Sentinels become even more powerful, too powerful even. Humans who might produce mutant children are imprisoned. Superheroes are mostly dead. Mutants are branded with M tattoos and placed into internment camps. Very obviously, X-Men's always done stuff like this, but the M tattoos and stuff like that, it's obviously very similar to prisoners of Auschwitz having the number tattoos on them. Obviously, Magneto was a prisoner of Auschwitz, and he ended up getting that tattoo, and that's where that comes from. And then obviously, just this is very, very similar to that. The surviving X-Men group in the future is very, very small. Surviving mutants in general is very small. Magneto is one of them, but we don't find out about him until later in the story. But the key survivors that we do know about at that time is Kitty Pryde, now as an adult. Obviously in X-Men at this time, she's a very young lady. Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Franklin Richards, obviously the son of Sue and Reed Richards. One of the most powerful people in Marvel Universe is Franklin Richards. And then Rachel Summers. She becomes very much more important later in the comics, but Rachel Summers is obviously the daughter of Scott and Jean. I'm believe the original, not the clones of either one of them. Their fucking family lineage is so fucking crazy. My brother actually has an X-Men book that has their entire family tree in it, which is really fucking cool, but it's also just crazy to look at. Especially since both Scott and Angie have clones and their clones have children, and they had children with their clones. I don't remember if the clones had children with each other, but most other heroes are gone. Panels show gravestones for many superheroes, implying the Sentinels wiped them out. Among the implied or shown to be dead heroes is Cyclops. His gravestone appears in the graveyard. Jean Grey, she's also shown to be dead in the timeline. Nightcrawler is listed among fallen X-Men. Angel, another X-Men believed to have died during the Sentinel Wars. And then other major heroes believed to be killed. For the Avengers, examples possibly killed are Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. For the Fantastic Four, Richard, Sue, Storm, basically the entire Fantastic Four. Their son Franklin Richards surviving suggests his parents were already gone. Why the Sentinels killed these many heroes, mutants must be eliminated or imprisoned, was kind of their logic, and it took over everything. Humans with mutant genetics must be imprisoned, superheroes who resist must be killed. Eventually they decide any superpowered being is a potential threat, so they hunt them all. So what caused this grim and really dark future? And if you actually look through the comic panels, which I'm hoping for the YouTube video, I'm going to be able to get some photos of the panels, a couple of the panels in like a photo, like a slideshow throughout the video. But you actually, like, it does a really, really good job at showing how dark and just destroyed and grim this future is and how bleak everything is from all of it. So, but the event that caused all of this is in 1980. Mystique and her Brotherhood of Evil Mutants assassinate Robert Kelly. Obviously, Robert Kelly's based off Robert Kennedy. After the assassination, humans panic. Obviously, if mutants can wipe out the president, then they can wipe out basically anybody. Like, if he's not safe, who is safe, realistically? You in your home in Chicago, you're not safe. Like, you know what I mean? Obviously. The president's supposed to be relatively have the most security out of anyone. So, for the fact that he isn't safe, you're definitely not safe. And then anti-mutant hysteria spreads basically everywhere. And then directly after the assassination, the Sentinel program is massively expanded. Before they were working on the Sentinel program, but it wasn't as funded and it wasn't going to be as big and as strong as it was until this kind of led into motion of it getting more backing and getting more things behind it to expand to an exponential rate and get to as large as it was to lead to the future that it became the future. Obviously, this eventually leads to the Sentinels enslaving humanity. Surviving X-Men come up with a last chance plan to kind of undo this timeline, if that makes sense. Go back in time and reverse the effects of this. The surviving X-Men come up with one last chance. Using psychic technology, they will send someone's mind back in time. Their goal is to stop the assassination of Senator Kelly. They choose Kitty Pryde. Her mind is sent back into her younger body in 1980. In the past timeline, the active X-Men include Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Angel, Storm, Wolverine, and Colossus. Young Kitty suddenly collapses because future Kitty's consciousness has taken over her body. This is obviously kind of expected. If your consciousness is forced out of your body, it's not a thing that should just normally happen, but if it did happen, you'd kind of expect to be fucked up like that. I'd imagine that's really fucking scary, though, for past Kitty Pryde if she were to remember that or feel that. Like, where does her consciousness go when new, old, or future Kitty Pryde's in her body? Does it go to future Kitty Pryde? I don't remember if they actually explain that. And if it does, and she's conscious of what's going on around her, she's just there whilst people are fucking around her. She's just kind of unconscious. Fucking crazy. But Kitty explains the terrible future to the current X-Men team. Mutants are enslaved, heroes killed, Sentinels ruling the world. At first, the X-Men are skeptical. Obviously, this person that they've known for a really long time was just randomly coming up with all this crap. But they quickly realize the threat is real. They race to Washington, D.C. to stop Mystique. Mystique's team attacks during the government hearing about mutants. this is another thing that was kind of leading to the Sentinels. They were trying to get more funding and more support for the Sentinel program, and obviously her attack helps that. The members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is Mystique, Destiny, Pyro, Avalanche, and Blob. The only one in there who's not necessarily a normal member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is Destiny. Obviously, Mystique's is either the leader or the co-leader with Magneto, and then Pyro, Avalanche, and Blob are basically always in it, at least in the comics and in the animated series. Their mission is to kill Senator Kelly. A massive fight breaks out between the X-Men and the Brotherhood. At the same time, while this is happening in the past, the future timeline is collapsing. Sentinels attack the last X-Men hideout. Only one by one the heroes are killed. Colossus and Storm die fighting Sentinels. Wolverine is killed. It is looking really, really bleak. And Wolverine being killed was one of the craziest fucking panels in Marvel Comics. He literally gets fucking disintegrated. It was so crazy. Obviously, I knew about it because it happened so long ago when I read it, but actually reading it and seeing it happen was so insane. Franklin Richard also dies. Only a few survivors remain. They are trying to stay alive long enough for the timeline to change. In the past timeline, but as the X-Men get there and they're obviously trying to fight, they're a little late. The Brotherhood already started their attack. Avalanche begins collapsing the structure with earthquakes. Pyro fills the chamber with massive flames. Blob blocks the exit so people can't escape. Obviously, chaos erupts. People are fucking freaking out. The X-Men jump into battle. The X-Men burst in and start fighting the Brotherhood. Some big things that occur are Nightcrawler teleporting around the battlefield, rescuing civilians and dodging attacks. Obviously, this is a big thing because they're a superhero team. They gotta be saving people, and this is a big part of not just fighting these bad guys, but also saving lives of people during the fight. Colossus smashes through the debris, and he fights the Blob. This is a pretty cool fight. I've never been a big fan of the Blob, but I do like Colossus, and him fighting the Blob is a pretty cool fight. Storm uses lightning and her wind to control the fire and the chaos in the room. Kind of shuts down Pyro, and then Wolverine goes directly after Mystique. During the chaos, Mystique gets a clear shot at Senator Kelly. She fires her weapon, but the X-Men intervene before the assassination can succeed. Kelly survives the attack. X-Men eventually overpower the villains. Avalanche is stopped before the building collapses. Pyro's fire is neutralized, obviously like I was saying earlier, by Storm, and Blob and the others are subdued. Mystique's assassination mission fails. Back in the future timeline, the surviving X-Men wait to see if reality changes, but the story ends ambiguously. The dystopian timeline may still exist as an alternate future, even though the assassination was stopped. Kinda similar to Endgame, how even if you can't go back and change a current future, you can only create alternate timelines. So I think it's similar to that. This idea later becomes a core Marvel concept, alternate timelines. Instead of erasing a future completely, it becomes a separate timeline. This future is later labeled Earth 811. This story is obviously so fucking important. One, it happened at a big time in comics that X-Men was so big already, so all these things happening and all these eyes on it, them doing this big monumental moment of what could be happening, and then creating this entire other timeline that they could also do stuff with later is so fucking cool, and it's such a big thing for them to do, especially at that time. For one, and then it's also just a big thing for future dark storylines and dark timelines. Marvel later reused this concept many times, not just in X-Men, obviously in Avengers and other stories. And then mutant genocide. The story parallels real-world issues like oppression and discrimination. And then obviously, like I was saying earlier, the Holocaust and all that, it very much mirrors that. So, and X-Men's always been known for having these deeper themes throughout the story. So this isn't necessarily a new thing, but it's very, very much of a... like, it's very much more in your face and showing you the grossness of it, and it gives you much more discomfort, which I think is kind of cool. And then obviously the time travel theme. Later X-Men stories in general, stories rely heavily on time travel. Not just X-Men, but X-Men specifically do have a lot of time travel stories specifically like that. And they rely heavily on timeline changes or stuff of that nature. None of them are as big of a story as this, but there are a lot of stories of it. And then obviously it inspired the Days of Future Past movie. and then it inspired several alternate future storylines that we will get to here in a minute. We'll get to both the movie and the alternate storylines. Well, actually, here, let's get to the alternate storylines. Let's get to the movie now. So obviously, the movie and the comic had a good amount of differences. The movie coming out in 1981, and also being in the larger Marvel universe, it was able to do more things to kind of hint at other superheroes either dying or being taken out, and then Franklin Richards being in the story in general. It just being in the larger Marvel universe had more characters, but other than that, they did a relatively good job representing just the amount and the large variety of characters throughout. But there were still a lot of differences, so let's get right into a good amount of them. The biggest difference, and the one that I hated the most, was in the comic, the character that got sent back in time was Kitty Pryde, obviously. Her mind was sent into her younger body in 1980 to warn the X-Men of obviously the future. In the movie, the time traveler is Wolverine. They explain this, that his mind was the only one, due to his healing factor, was the only one that would be able to survive it. I thought that was fucking stupid. Still think it's stupid to this day. I was excited when they announced this movie for Kitty Pryde, because I already had read the story, for Kitty Pryde to get this big fucking role, because and have an X-Men movie that wasn't purely focused on Wolverine, but of course we didn't get that because they can't do that. So that was the one thing that I really, really hated about them changing from the comic to the movie. But his mind goes back to 1973. Kitty Pryde, actually, funny enough, is the person who sends his mind back through time in the film, so she does have a relatively good role still, but it's not the one I was hoping for. The event they must stop in the comic is the assassination of Robert Kelly. Mystique's Brotherhood tries to kill him during a Senate hearing. This murder triggers massive anti-mutant panic that leads to Sentinel expansion. Obviously, like I said earlier, they were already working on it and trying to get funding and stuff, but after this, it very much shot forward and was able to go through much faster and bigger. In the movie, the key event is completely different. The mission is to stop, well, it's still assassination, but the mission is to stop Mystique from killing Bolivar Trask. Bolivar Trask invented the Sentinels in this timeline, and he might have in the comics too, I don't remember. In the movie timeline, Mystique kills Trask. Government uses her DNA. Sentinels evolve to adapt to mutant powers. That's what makes them nearly unstoppable and able to wipe out the entire mutant population. I did like this edition. I really, really liked that the Sentinels were able to adapt to abilities and stuff. I think that made them so fucking scary, especially with the looks of the future Sentinels, which I already mentioned that I really, really liked. That was really fucking cool. Obviously, in the comic, Mystique is very much more of a straight-up villain in general, but definitely in this storyline. She leads the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants to assassinate Senator Kelly. Members include, like I said earlier, Destiny, Pyro, Avalanche, and Blob. Avalanche, Blob, and Pyro are the only ones that I really recognize. I don't remember Destiny all that much. In the movie, Mystique becomes a tragic anti-hero more than anything. She's hunted and experimented on by Trask. Her actions are driven by revenge and protecting mutants. That's what she's trying to assassinate him so he can't continue the project. This ends up leading to the project growing even bigger than she could have imagined, so it backfires on her, but obviously she wouldn't know before this happens. In the future X-Men teams, in the comics, it was Kitty Pryde, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, and Franklin Richards. In the movie, the future team is totally, totally different. Professor X, Magneto, Storm, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, Bishop, Warpath, Blink, and Sunspot. I did like that they introduced different X-Men characters that we haven't seen before, like Sunspot, Blink, and Warpath, and then even Bishop. But this team's really freaking big, man, especially for a post-apocalyptic end-of-the-world kind of scenario. I think if they had a smaller team and they just focused on, like, say, Storm, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, I still would have still liked Warpath. So Warpath and Bishop, or even Warpath and Blink. We didn't even necessarily need Bishop for this. It would have been cool. This movie added many modern X-Men, obviously, to the ranks of the remaining X-Men for the movies. Obviously, the comic Sentinels are a bit different than the movie Sentinels. The classic giant robots created by the government to hunt mutants. They eventually take control of the country. The movie Sentinels much more powerful. They can adapt to mutant powers, change abilities, become nearly impossible to defeat. This is because they were built using Mystique's DNA. Like I was saying earlier, I always thought it was cool how they did that in the movie. I did think it was cool how powerful they made them. But the looks of the freaking Sentinels in the comics, man, is so classic. And I don't remember if we ever got a future Sentinel. Well, we got a future. Obviously, this went to the future, but the future Sentinels look the same in this. I wish they did have some sort of upgrade like they did in this, just because that was a really fucking sick looking upgrade. But in the movie, the 70s Sentinels look like shit. So, it's bizarre because it takes place in the 70s, so this is a perfect movie in a time period to do the crazy, bright, purple and pink fucking robot. Like, it would totally fit in this universe, but they just didn't do it. Past X-Men team from the comic is Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Angel, Storm, Wolverine, and Colossus. Like I said earlier, obviously in the movie it was Professor X, Magneto, Wolverine, and Beast. This is who they mainly focused on. It also introduced Quicksilver, which was weird. I didn't like that Quicksilver very much. People rave about the Quicksilver scenes, but I don't like them at all. So the story becomes more about Xavier and Magneto's relationship more than really anything else the movie does. The comic ending, the future might still exist. We're not very much sure. It leads ambiguous in suggesting it could remain in an alternate timeline on Earth 811. Because obviously in the comics they do a lot of these alternate timeline things. In the movie ending, the timeline is fully changed. Wolverine wakes up in the new future where many dead X-Men are alive again. The Sentinel future is erased. I didn't like this as much just because I do like the alternate timeline kind of thing. Big picture, the movie does relatively keep the core idea from the comic. A mutant travels back in time to prevent a key event that leads to a Sentinel-controlled future, but almost everything else is rewritten to connect with the Fox X-Men film universe rather than fit with the comic itself. But let's get in now to... I did enjoy the movie relatively. It wasn't my favorite. Still think out of all of the restarted ones after the first three when they've got the younger people, First Class was definitely the best. First Class is still, in my opinion, the best X-Men movie that they've done. But this was probably the second. And then I didn't watch Dark Phoenix, but Apocalypse wasn't very good either. Let's get into now though the timelines and stuff that happened due to this, and then just comics that came out after this that were connected to this. Obviously, like I said, there was a lot of stuff that came out of Days of Future Past. Marvel later expanded, like I said earlier, to the dystopian timeline called Earth 811 and created several stories that are either continue the future world or deal with characters from the timeline escaping into the main Marvel universe. Rachel Summers, for example, arrives in the present 1980s X-Men. The biggest continuation comes through Rachel Summers, the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, in the dark future. What happens? Rachel grows up in the Sentinel-controlled world. She becomes a powerful telepath and telekinetic. Mutants are hunted, tortured, and forced into concentration camps. Rachel eventually escapes her timeline and travels into the main Marvel timeline. Where this happens is Uncanny X-Men 141 and 142 for the future or the Days of Future Past. And then Uncanny X-Men 184 onward. She later becomes the Phoenix and joins the X-Men. Then we got Days of Future Present in 1990. One of the biggest sequels is the crossover Days of Future Present. The story premise is that the villains from the dystopian future travel back in time to capture Rachel Summers. The main villain is Ahab or Ahab. I'm not good with the pronunciations. Ahab turns mutants into hounds, brainwashed mutant hunters. Major heroes involved is the X-Men, Fantastic Four, X-Factor, and the New Mutants. The story expands the Sentinel future mythology a lot. I haven't actually read Days of Future... Well, I've read it before, but I haven't read Days of Future Present in a really, really long time. I honestly forgot about this when I was going to do this episode, so... Then there's a bunch of Earth 811 timeline stories. Marvel later revisited the original future timeline. Important stories include the Excalibur stories. The team of Excalibur encounters characters connected to Rachel's timeline. What we learn about the future is a lot more details that are revealed about how the Sentinels took over. The governments deploy Sentinels to control mutants. Sentinels upgrade themselves. It's not people like doing it, it's them upgrading themselves. They become too smart, basically. They enslave both mutants and humans. It's not just mutants. Superheroes are eliminated completely, basically. This builds the larger Earth of 811 history. And then obviously in 2023 we got Days of Future Past Doomsday. Marvel finally told how the dark future actually happened in Days of Future Past Doomsday. This story shows the years leading up to the dystopia. Major events include governments activating Sentinel programs, anti-mutant hysteria spreading, mutant camps forming, heroes trying and failing to stop the takeover. I thought this was an interesting thing for them to do, but I wasn't a big fan. I kind of liked that it was kind of up to your imagination to stuff they didn't show for you to think about what happened and what led to everything, rather than them actually show it. So for in 2023, for when they announced, or 2022, whenever they announced that they were going to do this before it happened, I wasn't too excited. And then when it happened, I thought it was really good, but I still wasn't too excited or too happy about it. It fills in the missing history between the present and the nightmare future. And then there's a whole bunch of alternate future X-Men stories inspired by it. Days of Future Past becomes the template for the dark future stories in the X-Men. Some stories that are influenced by it include Age of Apocalypse, obviously House of M, which is another really, really good story. We're going to do both of those for the thing, and then Battle of the Atom. We'll probably do all of those for an episode. But these all use the same idea. Changing one event can create a completely different future. In short, Days of Future Past led to 3 major story paths: Rachel Summers joining the X-Men, time travel battles with villains from the future, and then more stories on Earth 811 dystopian timeline. But now is when we're going to get into the secret for this episode. It is going to be Weapon X, the one where it's going to be 2 issues. I believe it is 43 and 44. Maybe it's 73 and 74. Let me look in I gotta find my notes for it. But a little behind the scenes, so we're gonna stop here and then continue on in a little bit when I do get those notes ready. So, but it's gonna be Weapon X. We're gonna see him getting ready to get the adamantium bonded to him, and then what happens when he gets the adamantium bonded to him. So I thought those 2 issues were gonna be really cool to do. So let's get right into that. Alright, yeah, so it's 73 and 74 of Marvel's Comics Weapon. So like I said, it started 73, and then we'll do 74 after, because it's kind of a follow-up, but it's mainly 73 that we're going to focus on. In the first chapter of the famous Weapon X storyline, written and illustrated by Barry Wintersmith, the story finally reveals how Wolverine got his adamantium skeleton and how brutal the Weapon X program really was. This issue is mostly about capturing Logan and preparing him for the experimentation. A lot of people aren't too big of fans that they gave this away in comics. It was kind of cool to have that mystery of how it happened rather than them showing it. But I'm one of the people that did enjoy it and really thought it was cool, so I'm on the other side of that equation. The story takes place inside a secret Canadian government Black Ops project called Weapon X program. Obviously, for anyone who knows about Wolverine, even if you just know him from the movies, you'll know about Weapon X program. Weapon X is a part of a larger program called Weapon Plus. Their mission is to create living weapons using mutants and experimental science. A whole bunch of different people came from this, obviously Deadpool, but there was a whole bunch of people that came from it. Captain America, for example, is the original. He's Weapon 1. Funny enough, Weapon 2 is animal experiments. There was a squirrel with Wolverine claws. There's just a whole bunch of fucking Wolverine, obviously. There's the Huntsman, which he didn't get a whole bunch of time. But then obviously there's I forget his name, but the assassin with the white mask. And then there's Wolverine's daughter. What's her name? Weapon 11 or whatever the hell. But there's a whole bunch of Weapon X Weapon Plus characters. The issue opens with a mysterious animalistic man wandering through the snowy wilderness. Obviously, at this point, we know it's Wolverine. We've seen the character prior to this, but you're going in pretending you don't, realistically. That man is Logan, though he isn't yet fully aware of who he is. Key things we see about him: he has animal instincts, his memory is already fragmented, kind of damaged from stuff he's been through. he behaves like a wild predator. Weapon X agents are hunting him. The scientists believe he is the perfect subject. Obviously, because they've been studying him, they see his healing factor, and they believe that he'll be able to survive the experiments better than somebody without a healing factor like his, especially as strong as his is. Inside of the facility, we meet the people running the program. The professor, the mastermind of the project, cold and scientific. He sees Logan as a specimen, not a person. He sees everyone that they work on as more of a experiment rather than actual people that they're working on and making into these weapons. So there's Dr. Cornelius, a scientist responsible for the adamantium bonding process. And then there's Dr. Hines, a technician monitoring the experiment. These characters mostly appear through lab observation rooms, watching Logan like a test animal, which is a really fucking devious, like, just panels. Like, they're hard to look at seeing a human being going through this. After being captured, Logan is taken into the lab. The scientists restrain him using metal clamps, surgical harnesses, electrodes connected to his brain. They want to break him psychologically. Or I said that like a fucking caveman. Psychologically. They describe him as the most perfect killing machine we've ever seen. Obviously, with how ferocious he is and stuff, prior to the adamantium being bonded to him and his healing factor, there's not much better of a choice or a test subject out there than him at this point. So, but they also very much fear him. They're afraid of what he can do and what he's capable of. So even restrained, Logan is a very, very, very dangerous man. The core purpose of the Weapon X program is revealed. They plan to bond the metal adamantium to Logan's skeleton. Adamantium is described as nearly indestructible, impossible for normal humans to survive being bonded with, because of, obviously, it basically killing you and then having to bring you back to life, and normal humans, or it'll kill normal humans, basically. They believe he might survive due to his healing factor. His mutant ability allows him to recover from almost any injury. This makes him the perfect test subject, like I just said. Throughout the issue, we see Logan's thoughts. His mind is chaotic. Flashes of animal instinct, flashes of pain, flashes of half memories. He doesn't fully understand where he is. The scientists deliberately erase parts of his identity. They want to turn him into a weapon without humanity, without the capability of stopping himself or having any sort of remorse or anything to stop him from completing the objective that they give him. One of the most iconic moments happens when Logan is placed inside of a liquid-filled containment tank. The tank keeps him alive during surgery, allows them to monitor his body, and acts as a restraint, so he obviously can't fight or do anything whilst they do this experiment. Cables and tubes run into his body. The scientists begin preparing the adamantium bonding procedure. One thing I did want to say before I get into this. I know a lot of the times I will do like comparing it to the movie and stuff too when I do stuff like this, like I just did with Days of Future Past. Yeah, X-Men Origins Wolverine was a fucking awful movie, and I will not be talking about it. The only thing I will say is, in the movie, he was willingly going through with this until he found out they wanted to erase his memories. He was not willingly going through with this in the comic. It's the only thing we're going to say about that movie. And shout out to them having Gambit. Other than that, fuck that movie. One of the worst Marvel movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Funny enough, I did like it as a kid, and we did get a really, really good Wolverine game out of it, so it wasn't a total loss, but come on. Issue emphasizes psychological horror rather than action. Obviously, we're seeing this human being be put through this, like, I guess an animal, because we do tests on animals, but even that's crazy, but seeing this happen to a human is so fucking terrifying. The themes of the story very much include dehumanization. Logan is treated like a laboratory property, laboratory experiment. Loss of identity. His memories and personality are stripped away from him part by part, psychologically. And scientific cruelty. The scientists justify everything as progress. The tone makes Weapon X one of the darkest Wolverine stories ever written. One of the darkest Marvel stories ever written, really. Just how fucking grotesque and just sad looking at everything that happens and what is going on is. By the end of issue 73, Logan is fully restrained. The scientists prepare the adamantium bonding. His body is pushed to the edge of survival. The issue ends as the experiment begins. The next chapters show the adamantium bonding process, Logan's violent escape, the destruction of Weapon X facility. And that is where we're going, straight into issue 74. We're not even going to stop and talk too much about it. Obviously, it's a fucking crazy issue. It's very gross and scary seeing a human being get treated like this, and seeing Logan, a character that we have seen in other things and we do like and care about, in this predicament. It is a very fucking hard issue to read and a hard thing to look at. It's really fucking cool at the same time. But let's go right into issue 74. Well, before we do that, actually, let's talk about this issue, why it is just how important this issue is. Obviously, it's showing for the first time how his adamantium skeleton came about, how the Weapon X program tortured him, and then why Wolverine struggles with memory and identity loss throughout the rest of his time in comics. So it's a very, very big issue, and it's a lot of important things that come from this issue. But now let's go right into issue 74. Again, it is written and illustrated by Barry Windsor-Smith. Issue 74 focused on the actual adamantium bonding experiment, one of the most painful and dangerous procedures ever shown in Marvel Comics, and one of the most gross fucking procedures shown in Marvel Comics. This chapter is almost entirely about science, suffering, and the entire psychological destruction of Logan. At the start of the issue, Logan is already restrained inside of the Weapon X laboratory tank. Obviously, we saw that in issue 73. The scientists begin preparing the most dangerous part of the program, bonding liquid adamantium to his skeleton. Adamantium, like we said earlier, is nearly described as indestructible, impossible for normal humans to survive, and fatal if the bonding fails. The scientists believe Logan's healing factor, like we said earlier, might allow him to survive the impossible and survive this experiment. Inside the observation room, Weapon X team watches the procedure. The key figures include, like I said earlier, the professor, Dr. Cornelius, and Hines. They speak about Logan as if he were a laboratory animal. The professor repeatedly says that Logan is the perfect specimen, because obviously with his healing factor, he is the only person that's going to be able to survive this. But even the scientists show fear. They know Logan could become unstoppable if the experiment works, which is obviously why they're getting rid of his mental state and his mind. While the experiment proceeds, the comic shows Logan's thoughts. His mind is fragmented. We see flashes of animal instincts, pain and rage, partial memories. Logan is barely conscious, but still fighting mentally to survive and stay in and capable of knowing what's going on. The experiment is designed to break his mind so he can be controlled later. The core event of the issue is obviously the bonding process. Liquid adamantium is pumped into Logan's body while he is submerged in the tank. The metal slowly coats his bones. The process covers his skeleton in adamantium, reinforces his claws, and permanently fuses the metal to his bones. The scientists constantly monitor his vital signs. Several times they believe he might die during the procedure, but his healing factor keeps restarting his body. During the bonding, problems start appearing. Logan's brain activity becomes extremely unstable. The professor realizes something terrifying. Logan's animal instincts are overpowering the conditioning. Instead of becoming obedient, he is becoming more feral. The issue emphasizes very much a key theme of the Weapon X story, that Logan is being stripped of his humanity. The scientists refer to him as subject, specimen, weapon. They intentionally erase his identity to turn him into a living killing machine. But Logan's instincts suggest he cannot truly be controlled. I think this is a very powerful moment because obviously, as much as they're putting him through, him not being able to be stopped like normal is just showing how powerful of a character he is. And I think that's really fucking cool. Adamantium, by the end of the issue 74, the adamantium bonding is mostly successful. Logan is still alive. His skeleton is now permanently reinforced with adamantium. However, something has clearly gone wrong. His mind is becoming more unstable and violent. The scientists realize they might have created something more dangerous than they intended. This issue is so important because it explains how his skeleton became, covered in adamantium, why his memories are damaged, why he struggles between humanity and animal instinct. It also sets up the next chapter where Logan will become his violent escape from the Weapon X facility. This will lead us directly into issue 75. Alrighty, so that leads us directly into book 75. There are more books after this with the same story, but I don't want to get too far into it. I just kind of want to talk about what happened to him in the lab, and then him breaking out of the lab. So, chapter focuses on the mind control, brain damage, and the Weapon X program trying to turn Logan into a controllable weapon. At the start of the issue, Logan has survived the impossible procedure, but the scientists quickly notice that something is wrong. His body readings show extreme pain levels, unstable brain activity, violent neurological spikes. Not what they were hoping, obviously. He still seems a lot more broken than they were hoping for. Even with the healing factor, the adamantium bonding has shattered parts of his mind, completely destroying him. To stabilize and control Wolverine, the scientists attach the now famous, Weapon X control helmet. This helmet connects directly to Logan's brain, allows scientists to monitor his thoughts, can send electrical impulses into his nervous system. Their goal is to override his personality and instincts. They want to turn Logan into a programmable killing machine. Obviously, that was the goal of the entire Weapon X thing, was to create a controllable weapon. The greatest controllable weapon. Inside Logan's thoughts, the comic shows something terrifying. Instead of becoming obedient, Logan's consequences begins regressing into a feral state. Or his consciousness, rather. I said consequences. I can't read my own writing. His mind becomes dominated by hunting instincts, rage, survival reflexes. The scientists begin referring to him as the animal. Again, this very much shows just the dehumanization and everything that leads to the dehumanization of the character. Inside the observation room, tensions rise among the scientists. Dr. Cornelius, he becomes worried for the experiment may be too dangerous. The professor, he refuses to stop the project. He insists Logan will become the ultimate weapon once fully conditioned. The disagreement shows the ethical divide between the researchers. I don't necessarily even think it's an ethical divide. I think the one is just scared for his life. They both want it and still want this thing to go right. It just one's more willing to keep going even if it's going wrong. One of the darkest parts of the issue is Logan's memory fragmentation. The Weapon X process is destroying his past. Logan experiences flashes of unknown faces, war memories, violent images, but the memories are incomplete. The program essentially wipes out his identity, so he doesn't really remember who he is or what's going on. And this is why years later in the comics he spends so much time trying to rediscover his past and rediscover who he is and what's going on. The scientists start testing their ability to control Logan's actions through the helmet and neural programming. They attempt to stimulate aggression, suppress independent thought, train him to respond to commands. But Logan's brain doesn't behave normally. His healing factor consistently repairs neurological damage, disrupting their programming. Basically, every time they do something to fuck with his brain, his healing factor is fixing it before they have the opportunity to keep fucking with it. By the end of the issue, the scientists realize a disturbing truth. The Weapon X procedure did work physically. Logan is now stronger, faster, and nearly indestructible, but mentally he has become something else. Instead of a controllable soldier, they have created a feral predator with metal bones and claws. The story ends with Logan barely contained. The scientists continue pushing the program forward, but it is clear something catastrophic is coming. The Weapon X team believes they are on the verge of perfecting their weapon. In reality, they are about to unleash something they cannot control. This book is very important. For one, it points out a lot and gets more into a lot of the why Wolverine was looking for himself and trying to figure out stuff about his past. Basically, his entire comic book runs after this. Why he lost most of his memories, why the Weapon X program ultimately failed, because for one, they were trying to brainwash him basically, and his healing factor just kept stopping it from happening. It also builds the tension leading to the most famous moment of the storylines, Wolverine's violent escape from the Weapon X facility, but this does lead us directly into issue 76, which will be the last issue for this breakdown. After the adamantium bonding and the attempt to control Logan's mind, this chapter focuses on the testing of the Weapon X that they've created. The scientists now want to know one thing: can they control Wolverine enough to use him as a living weapon? At the start of the issue, Logan is alive but barely stable. His condition: adamantium skeleton, successfully bonded, healing factor keeping him alive, brain activity extremely unstable. The Weapon X helmet is still attached to his head. The device allows the scientists to monitor and manipulate his brain signals, but they are discovering something disturbing. Logan's mind keeps resisting their control signals. Inside the observation room, the Weapon X team debate the results, key figures involved, the professor obsessed with finishing the experiment, and Dr. Cornelius increasingly concerned about Logan's mental damage, technicians monitoring the equipment. The professor believes Logan is the perfect weapon. Others worry they've created something too dangerous to control, which ultimately they did. Throughout the issue, we see Logan's internal thoughts, but they are no longer normal human thoughts. His consciousness is dominated by instinct, hunger, rage, and survival. Logan's identity is fading very, very fast. The Weapon X program has pushed him into a feral mental state, almost like a wild animal trapped in a cage. The scientists begin a new stage of experiment, behavioral conditioning, using the helmet and neural experiment. They attempt to trigger aggression control when Logan attacks, program him to respond to commands. They stimulate his brain and watch how he reacts. Each test pushes him closer to losing his remaining humanity. Again, these tests are kind of fucking gruesome to watch. Obviously, we're watching a human being get treated like a fucking lab experiment. During these tests, the scientists observe the effects of the adamantium skeleton. They confirm several things. Logan's claws are now reinforced with adamantium. His bones are now nearly unbreakable. His healing factor has adapted to the metal. This makes him one of the most physically dangerous beings on Earth. But the stronger he becomes physically, the more unstable he becomes mentally, which is obviously terrifying them. One of the most important parts of the issue is Logan's growing awareness. Even in his feral state, he begins to understand he is in prison. The scientists are harming him. He needs to escape. His animal instincts start to analyzing the environment. He begins to study the lab like a predator studying a cage. While Logan grows more aware of the scientists, remain focused on the data. They treat him as a test subject, a weapon, a prototype, and an experiment. They fail to recognize that Logan is slowly regaining control of his instincts. And their arrogance will lead to disaster. By the end of the issue, Logan is physically stronger than ever. The scientists believe the project is progressing. The control of the programming appears to be working, but readers can clearly see the truth. Logan is learning, adapting, and waiting. The weapon is about to turn on its creators. Why this issue is so important is because it shows even more how the cruelty of Logan, and then him kind of getting more in control of himself and realizing what's going on and realizing that he needs to escape. This is kind of the issue where the escape is initiated almost. And then we actually are going to skip ahead now to the actual escape. Up to this point, Weapon X program has captured Wolverine, bounded adamantium to his skeleton, and attempted to control his mind. But in this issue, everything starts to collapse. The chapter shows the moment Logan begins to break free from the program. Logan's mind reaches the breaking point. At the beginning of the issue, Logan is still under Weapon X control systems. The scientists continue running neurological tests through the helmet attached to his head, but something changes. Logan's brain activity becomes extremely unstable. His mind is no longer responding to the conditioning. Instead, his instincts begin taking over completely. Inside his thoughts, we see flashes of rage, animal hunting instincts, survival reflexes, and the scientists realize his brain is rejecting their programming. Despite the warning signs, the Weapon X leader, known as the Professor, refuses to stop. He believes the experiment is close to perfection. The Professor orders the team to increase neural stimulation, push Logan's aggression higher, test his combat capabilities. His belief is if Logan becomes more violent, they can channel that aggression into a controllable weapon. But the opposite happens. The extreme stimulation pushes Logan into his first full berserker rage. This is a state Wolverine later becomes famous for. In this condition, pain no longer affects him. His instincts fully control his actions. He becomes incredibly dangerous. The scientists lose control of his neurological signals. The helmet and equipment stop restraining his mind. Logan finally breaks free of some restraints. This moment is extremely important. Up till now, he has been restrained in things, sedated, controlled by machines. Now he begins physically fighting back. His adamantium claws extend and he starts attacking the facility. Alarms begin sounding throughout the laboratory. Security teams rush in to contain Logan, but they quickly learn something terrifying. Logan is faster, stronger, and nearly impossible to injure now. His adamantium skeleton makes him incredibly durable, and his healing factor allows him to recover from gunfire. The Weapon X guards attempt to stop him using firearms, security barriers, and containment systems, but Logan tears through all of them. The scientists watching from the control room realize something horrifying. They didn't create a controllable soldier. They created a living weapon they cannot stop and who will be coming for them. Even in his feral state, Logan's instincts guide him. He isn't randomly destroying everything. His animal mind is focused on one goal: escape the cage. He moves through the facility like a predator navigating territory. Inside the control room, Dr. Cornelius begins to panic. Technicians try to shut down systems. The professor refuses to admit failure, but the situation is spiraling out of control. The Weapon X project is collapsing. By the end of the issue, Logan has begun tearing through the facility. The scientists are losing control of the experiment. The Weapon X program is entering total chaos. The stage is now set for the most famous moment in the entire storyline: Wolverine destroying the Weapon X complex. And that's about as far as we're going to go. I know it's a bit of a teaser, not getting all the way to that thing, but I mainly just wanted to focus on the treatment and then the growth and Wolverine being able to get his mind relatively back to get out of the situation that he's in. And obviously, if you keep reading, you will see him get out of it. And the issues we read, you'll see even more. We skipped. You'll see even more torture of the character. But I think they did such a good job at getting you to totally be in touch with the character and want to see him get out of that horrible situation and seeing him in. So I think they did a really good job with that. But that will be all, at least that we're gonna read for the Weapon X storyline, and that is all for the Days of Future Past storyline. Obviously, again, this is going to be a longer episode. Realistically, none of my episodes are going to be shorter than 30 minutes ever, but with the ones that I plan on doing in the next couple of weeks, I don't really plan on any of them being shorter than like 45 or so. So if you like shorter videos, then let me know, but if you are enjoying these longer videos, then let me know. But I've been saying this for a couple weeks now. I'm going to continue to say it. We are up on YouTube. All of the recent episodes. This episode will be up 2 days after that comes out on Spotify, and it is coming out on Monday. We got an anime episode coming out this Friday. I don't know what it is going to be yet, but we'll see what it comes. We have the bonus episode that is going to be coming out here in a couple weeks, so be ready for that. The next comic book episode we do will be Judge Dredd, Judge Child. It's one of my favorite non-Marvel or DC storylines, so get ready for that. And we'll probably be doing a good amount of non-Marvel and DC comics coming up, because I did think that would be a cool thing to do, because I have been kind of looking at other podcasts and shows that do similar things, and a lot of them don't focus on those kind of storylines as much. So I would like to get into some of the really cool ones. One we're definitely not doing is Herogasm, or really any of the boys comics, because those are fucking awful comics. But I want to thank everybody who has been listening and on YouTube and on Spotify to the episodes. It means more than you know. I appreciate everybody for following, and I appreciate everybody who's going to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, share it with your friends, your family, share it online, whatever you want to do. That will help more than you know. I could not thank you guys enough, and that will be all for this week's episode, or this day's episode rather, because they're going to have another one this week. But that'll be it. Dr. Panel out.